What if I told you that you could walk into any room, any negotiation, any conversation, and completely shift the power dynamic in your favor without ever raising your voice or trying to prove how smart you are? That you could outmaneuver even the most intelligent person in the room, not by knowing more facts or having more degrees, but by understanding something far more valuable: human psychology and the art of strategic thinking. Most people have this completely backwards. They think intelligence is about memorizing information, showing off their vocabulary, or demonstrating their expertise at every opportunity. But here's the reality that separates the truly powerful from everyone else. Outsmarting someone has almost nothing to do with what you know and everything to do with how deeply you understand people, including yourself. The most successful negotiators, leaders, and influential people in history weren't necessarily the smartest in the traditional sense. They were the most strategically aware. Here's what most people don't realize. The majority of individuals you encounter are operating on complete autopilot. They're reacting instead of responding, talking more than they're listening, and desperately trying to appear intelligent, respected, or powerful, without understanding that they're actually exposing their deepest insecurities and weaknesses with every word they speak. They're playing checkers while life is chess, and they don't even realize the game has changed. The truly strategic minds don't feel the need to dominate every conversation. They watch carefully, they listen intently, and they understand the profound power of silence so thick it makes others uncomfortable enough to reveal their true intentions. They never show all their cards because they understand that one perfectly timed move is infinitely more powerful than a dozen hasty reactions. They've mastered something that most people never even think about: the ability to remain calm and collected when everyone else is losing their composure. If you've ever walked away from an important conversation thinking, "I should have said this," or "I wish I had handled that differently," then what I'm about to share with you will fundamentally change how you approach every interaction for the rest of your life. This isn't about manipulation or deception. It's about understanding the psychological principles that govern human behavior and using that knowledge to navigate the world with unprecedented clarity and control. Rule 1. Master your internal world before you attempt to influence the external world. Before you ever think about outsmarting anyone else, you must first learn to outsmart yourself. This might sound counterintuitive, but it's the foundation that everything else builds upon. The real battlefield isn't in the boardroom, the courtroom, or across a negotiation table. It's in your own mind. If you can't control your emotions, your thoughts, and your reactions, then someone else will control them for you, and that puts you at a massive disadvantage before you even begin. Think about this carefully. Every single time you get triggered, every time you lose your temper, every time you become defensive, flustered, or offended, what you're actually doing is handing over complete control of the situation to another person. You're giving them the ability to pull your strings like a puppet master, and once they realize they can get a predictable reaction out of you, they've already won the psychological game. That's not power, that's vulnerability disguised as strength. True mental mastery means developing the ability to pause when every instinct in your body is screaming at you to explode. It means maintaining your composure when you're under intense pressure, when you're being challenged, when someone is deliberately trying to push you to your breaking point. You simply cannot outthink someone when your emotions are doing the thinking for you, and that's exactly what happens to most people in high-stakes situations. When you're emotionally hijacked, your judgment becomes clouded, your decision-making becomes impaired, and you start operating from a place of fear, anger, or ego rather than strategic clarity. The people who appear most powerful in any room aren't necessarily the most charismatic, the most confident, or even the most experienced. They're the ones who can maintain their psychological equilibrium no matter what chaos is happening around them. This level of mental discipline doesn't happen overnight. It comes from deliberate practice in small, everyday situations. When someone interrupts you, do you immediately snap back, or can you maintain your composure and respond with calm authority? When you feel the urge to correct someone or defend your ego, can you instead choose to remain silent, understanding that sometimes your silence speaks louder than any argument you could make? Every interaction you have is an opportunity to strengthen this crucial skill. The moment you allow someone to make you feel small, angry, or frustrated, you've already lost your strategic advantage. You're no longer leading the interaction, you're simply reacting to it. And people who want to manipulate or control you will study your emotional patterns, looking for the cracks in your armor because your emotional reactions are often the easiest things to exploit. Mental mastery also requires you to stop taking things personally. Most people walk through life with psychological wounds that are easily triggered, so when someone criticizes them, ignores them, or challenges their authority, it cuts straight to their core insecurities. But when you've done the internal work to understand your own worth and value, these external attacks lose their power to destabilize you. You become psychologically untouchable, not because you don't feel emotions, but because you don't allow temporary feelings to dictate permanent actions. The calmest person in any room is usually the one with the most control, and this isn't an accident. Elite performers, skilled negotiators, and experienced interrogators are all trained to regulate their breathing, observe rather than react, and maintain their composure regardless of external pressure. This doesn't come from natural talent. It comes from intentional preparation and consistent practice. Rule 2. Become a master of human psychology and nonverbal communication. People are constantly telling you exactly who they are without speaking a single word. But most individuals completely miss these crucial signals because they're too focused on what they want to say next. If you want to develop the ability to outsmart anyone, you can't just listen to their words. You need to become fluent in reading the signals they're sending through their body language, tone of voice, and behavioral patterns. Outsmarting people isn't about being louder, more aggressive, or more dominant. It's about being exponentially more aware of the subtle psychological dynamics at play. Human beings are creatures of habit, emotion, and ego, and they leak information constantly through micro-expressions, posture changes, voice inflection, eye movement patterns, and word choices. These aren't random behaviors, they're psychological signals that reveal what someone is really thinking and feeling beneath their conscious presentation. Every person you encounter, regardless of how guarded or sophisticated they might appear, has predictable patterns of behavior. Once you learn to recognize and interpret these patterns, you stop operating blindly in your interactions. You begin to see the psychological landscape of every conversation, understanding not just what people are saying, but why they're saying it and what they're trying to achieve. Let's start with the eyes, which are often called the windows to the soul, but are more accurately described as windows into someone's mental state. People can fake smiles, they can pretend to be confident, they can perform politeness, but the eyes rarely lie convincingly. Pay attention to the subtle flicker when someone is asked a direct question, the way their gaze shifts away when they're uncomfortable, the delayed blink that indicates processing, or the narrowing that happens just before they become defensive. When someone claims to be confident but their eyes repeatedly dart toward the floor, you're witnessing a performance, not genuine self-assurance. These moments of incongruence between what someone says and what their body reveals are invaluable sources of information about their true psychological state. Then there's the voice itself. Not just the words, but the tone, pace, and rhythm. Is their voice tight with tension? Are they speaking unusually quickly because they're nervous? Or unusually slowly because they're carefully calculating every word? Are they over-explaining simple points, which often indicates deception or insecurity? Are they leaving long pauses before answering straightforward questions, which might suggest they're constructing their response rather than recalling it? Most people only pay attention to communication when it's directed at them, but this is a massive mistake. You learn the most about someone's true character when they think they're not being observed. Watch how they treat service workers, how they interact with people they perceive as having less power, how they behave when they think no one important is watching. That's when the polished mask slips and you see the authentic person underneath. Reading people effectively isn't about making judgments or labeling someone as good or bad. It's about developing a deeper understanding of human psychology so you can navigate interactions with greater clarity and precision. If someone enters a room and immediately makes themselves appear larger, broad stance, loud voice, intense eye contact, they're likely trying to project dominance. But the crucial question is whether this is genuine confidence or a psychological mask covering deep insecurity. You won't find this answer by confronting them directly. Instead, you observe the details. What happens when someone with higher status enters the room? Do they maintain their dominant posture or do they subtly shrink back? How do they handle situations where their authority is questioned? These behavioral patterns reveal far more than any words ever could. When it comes to deception, many people assume that liars avoid eye contact, but this isn't always accurate. A practiced deceiver might actually maintain excessive eye contact because they've been told that's what honest people do. However, they often overcompensate, creating unnaturally rigid eye contact that feels uncomfortable and inauthentic. Genuine eye contact is fluid and natural, moving organically rather than being locked in place. Your intuition processes information much faster than your conscious mind, so when something feels off about someone's behavior or story, trust that instinct. Your subconscious is picking up on inconsistencies and patterns that your analytical mind hasn't yet processed. Rule 3. Master the strategic use of silence and precision questioning. In our noise-obsessed culture, where everyone is constantly competing for attention and airtime, silence has become one of the most powerful and underutilized tools available. Most people are terrified of silence because they interpret it as emptiness that needs to be filled, but this reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how psychological power actually works. Silence isn't empty, it's loaded with potential, and when you learn to wield it strategically, it becomes one of your most potent weapons. The majority of people are deeply uncomfortable with silence in conversations. They rush to fill gaps, they over-explain their positions, they share more information than necessary, all because they mistakenly believe that the person talking the most has the most control. But the opposite is true. The person who can sit comfortably in silence, who doesn't feel compelled to fill every pause, is the one who actually commands the interaction. When you don't immediately respond to someone's statement or question, you force them to wonder what you're thinking, and the moment they start guessing about your mental state, they've lost their psychological footing. People interpret silence in many different ways. It could signal confidence, indifference, disagreement, or deep contemplation, and this ambiguity creates psychological tension that most people find unbearable. Consider what happens when someone insults you and you respond with complete silence. This leaves them in a state of uncertainty. Did their words hit their intended target, or did you consider their attack so insignificant that it didn't warrant a response? This ambiguity creates internal pressure that shifts the entire dynamic of the interaction. The person who expected a defensive reaction now has to sit with their own words and the weight of your composed silence. This principle becomes especially powerful when you combine strategic silence with precision questioning. The art of asking the right questions isn't just about gathering information, it's about shifting psychological energy, disrupting someone's prepared responses, and opening doors that they thought were securely closed. The key isn't to bombard people with questions, but to ask the specific questions that go beneath the surface and interrupt their mental scripts. Powerful questions don't need to be complex or clever. They need to be intentional and well-timed. Questions like, "What makes you say that?" or "What does that mean to you?" or "Why now?" are disarming because they're open enough to allow for various responses, but pointed enough to create discomfort if someone is hiding something or operating from a place of deception. The magic happens when you pair these questions with silence. Ask your question, then wait. Don't immediately rephrase it, don't answer it for them. Don't fill the space with additional words. Hold the space and let the silence do the psychological heavy lifting. There's a well-documented psychological effect where people feel compelled to provide more complete answers when they're met with silence after a question. This pressure makes them dig deeper into their thoughts and feelings, often revealing more than they initially intended. In negotiation scenarios, this principle is particularly powerful. The person who speaks first after an offer is made is typically at a psychological disadvantage. If you present a proposal and then remain silent, you learn valuable information about the other party's position based on how they respond to that silence. Do they immediately counter-offer? Do they justify their position? Do they try to modify the terms? Each of these responses gives you insight into their negotiating strategy and their level of comfort with your proposal. Strategic silence also serves as an emotional regulation tool in heated situations. When you don't respond to someone's aggression or provocation, you neutralize their emotional energy. You don't give them the fuel they need to escalate the conflict. In that stillness, they're forced to confront their own behavior without the distraction of your reaction. People expect pushback, especially when they're being deliberately provocative. When you don't provide that expected resistance, when you simply maintain your position and observe, it creates psychological imbalance. They begin to question whether their approach is working, whether they've misjudged the situation, or whether you're planning some response they haven't anticipated. The beauty of using silence strategically is that it doesn't require any special authority or high-status position. You don't need to be the boss, the expert, or the person with the most experience. You just need the discipline to resist the urge to fill every moment with words. This discipline is rare because most people equate silence with weakness, but it actually takes incredible mental strength to remain still when your ego wants to react immediately. Rule 4. Transform conflict into strategic advantage. Conflict is one of the inevitable realities of human interaction, and most people approach it with the wrong mindset entirely. They see conflict as something to be avoided, minimized, or quickly resolved because it makes them uncomfortable. But this perspective misses one of the most important truths about human dynamics. Conflict isn't a threat to be managed. It's an opportunity to be leveraged. When you understand how to navigate conflict strategically, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for establishing your position and demonstrating your capabilities. The reason most people struggle with conflict is that they take it personally and respond emotionally rather than strategically. They get caught up in defending their ego, proving they're right, or trying to win the immediate argument. But this approach misses the bigger picture entirely. Conflict is a revealer of character, and when you can remain calm and strategic while others are losing their composure, you automatically gain a significant advantage. When someone is under pressure, their psychological mask begins to slip. You see their true priorities, their insecurities, their emotional triggers, and their decision-making patterns. If you can stay grounded and observant during these moments, you don't just survive the conflict. You gain valuable intelligence that you can use to your advantage in future interactions. Real power in conflict situations doesn't come from aggression or dominance. It comes from control. Control over your emotions, your responses, and your strategic positioning. When someone attacks you verbally and you don't flinch, when your voice remains steady and your posture doesn't shift, you've already won the first and most important battle. Most people expect retaliation when they're being aggressive, so when you respond with calm composure, it forces them to completely recalibrate their approach. Transforming conflict into strategic advantage means responding with precision rather than emotion. Emotional reactions are predictable, messy, and easy to manipulate. Strategic responses are controlled, calculated, and carry significant psychological weight. When someone publicly questions your credibility or challenges your authority, the natural impulse is to defend yourself immediately and match their energy level. But this is exactly what they want. They want to pull you into an emotional battle that makes you look defensive and unprofessional. Instead of taking the bait, you pause, maintain eye contact, let the silence stretch for a moment, then respond with calm curiosity. That's an interesting perspective. What specifically makes you say that? Or, help me understand your reasoning behind that statement. What you've done is shifted the entire dynamic from emotional to analytical. You've made the conflict about clarity and understanding rather than ego and dominance. Now the spotlight is on them to justify their position, and while they're scrambling to back up their attack, you remain composed and professional. Understanding what people really want in conflict situations is crucial for strategic navigation. Most conflicts aren't actually about the surface-level issues being discussed. They're about deeper psychological needs: respect, recognition, control, or validation. When you can identify these underlying motivations, you can address the real issue rather than getting caught up in the surface-level arguments. Sometimes the most powerful move in conflict isn't to fight back. It's to redirect the entire conversation. Let the other person exhaust their emotional energy, then pivot towards solutions and outcomes. This repositioning makes you appear mature, professional, and focused on results rather than personal battles. However, there are times when you need to establish clear boundaries and demonstrate that you won't accept disrespectful behavior. This doesn't mean becoming aggressive or matching their energy. It means responding with calm authority. I don't operate that way in my professional relationships. Or, if we're going to work together effectively, mutual respect is non-negotiable. You don't need to raise your voice or become emotional. You simply need to speak with the clarity and certainty of someone who has already decided what they will and won't tolerate. The key insight that separates strategic thinkers from everyone else is that they don't take conflict personally. They analyze it, learn from it, and use it to their advantage. They understand that when someone is trying to provoke them, that person is actually revealing valuable information about their own psychology, their strategies, and their weaknesses. Conflict reveals patterns of behavior, and once you can identify these patterns, you can predict how someone will respond in future situations. This gives you a tremendous advantage in all your dealings with that person. Every confrontation becomes a learning opportunity. Every insult becomes a signal. Every attack becomes a chance to demonstrate your psychological strength and strategic thinking. Rule 5. Think 3 strategic moves ahead, while others react to the present moment. The fundamental difference between people who consistently succeed and those who struggle is their time horizon for strategic thinking. Most people are playing checkers, making decisions based on immediate circumstances, emotional impulses, and short-term gains. But life is actually chess, and the people who master it are constantly thinking several moves ahead, anticipating consequences, and positioning themselves for long-term advantage. Playing checkers in a chess world is why so many people get blindsided by outcomes they never saw coming. They get caught up in surface-level victories, immediate gratification, and reactive decision-making. They chase validation instead of building genuine influence. They defend themselves against trivial attacks instead of focusing on strategic positioning. This short-term thinking might provide temporary satisfaction, but it doesn't create lasting power or sustainable success. Strategic thinking requires a fundamentally different approach to decision-making. Instead of asking, "What feels good right now?" or "How can I win this immediate battle?" you ask, "What are the long-term consequences of this action? And how will this position me for future opportunities? And what will my opponents do in response? And how can I use their predictable reactions to my advantage?" This kind of thinking demands significant emotional discipline because it often requires you to suppress the ego's desire for immediate satisfaction. You might need to accept a small loss today to position yourself for a major victory tomorrow. You might need to let someone think they've won a battle while you're quietly winning the war. Most people can't handle this kind of delayed gratification, which is exactly why strategic thinking gives you such a significant advantage. Consider how this applies to professional conflicts. When someone disrespects you publicly or undermines your authority, the checker's move is to respond immediately and forcefully to prove that you're not someone to be messed with. This satisfies your ego and makes you feel powerful in the moment, but it doesn't necessarily serve your long-term interests. The chess move is more sophisticated. You listen carefully, you don't overreact, you let them feel like they've gained some ground, and then you leverage your growing influence over time to make strategic moves that elevate your position while exposing their unprofessionalism, all without ever directly confronting them about the original incident. This approach requires you to think about every interaction as part of a larger game. In chess, every piece has a specific role. Not every move is about immediate domination, and sometimes you sacrifice something small to create a much larger opportunity. Real power operates the same way. It's often subtle, sometimes almost invisible, but devastatingly effective over time. Strategic thinking also changes how you approach relationships, negotiations, and career decisions. Instead of thinking, "What do I want to say in this conversation?" you think, "How do I want this person to feel at the end of our interaction, and what sequence of ideas will guide them to that emotional state?" You stop communicating just to express yourself, and you start communicating for specific psychological effects. When evaluating opportunities, strategic thinkers ask different questions than everyone else. While most people focus on immediate benefits, more money, higher status, immediate recognition, strategic thinkers ask about long-term positioning. What does this opportunity cost me in 5 years? What does it align me with? Who does it put me in contact with? What doors might it close while this one opens? They understand that sometimes saying no to something good now allows you to say yes to something extraordinary later. This forward-thinking approach also protects you from manipulation and deception. When you're trained to think several moves ahead, you become much more difficult to catch off guard or manipulate. You start recognizing setups before they fully develop. You learn to identify patterns in people's behavior, and you develop an intuitive sense for when someone is trying to position you for their advantage rather than yours. Timing becomes crucial when you're thinking strategically. One of the most difficult lessons is learning when not to move, when not to respond, when not to act. Sometimes the smartest move is patience, letting people underestimate you, letting them think they've won, while you're quietly positioning yourself for your next several moves. This kind of restraint is rare and powerful because most people feel compelled to act immediately. Everything changes when you shift from short-term reactions to long-term strategic positioning. You stop living move by move and start playing the entire board. You become intentional rather than reactive, focused rather than scattered, tactical rather than emotional. When other people realize you're not just thinking about what's happening now, but about what happens next and after that, they stop trying to outmaneuver you because they recognize they're playing a completely different game. The most powerful people in any situation are rarely the loudest or most aggressive. They're the ones who understand when to speak and when to remain silent, when to push forward and when to wait patiently, when to engage directly and when to let circumstances develop.